Welcome back to Season 7 of the ReidConnect-Ed podcast, co-hosted by myself, licensed psychologist Dr. Gerald Reid, and my sister, educational therapist Alexis Reid, providing resources on topics related to mental health, education, and sport and performance psychology. Firstly, the desire to belong and feel connection is paramount. If you're human, you care about connection. Maybe your desire for connection and experience of connection varies and fluctuates across your lifetime, but straight out of the womb, we seek connection. It is so important to our human experience. Now, if you experience social anxiety, that means you truly care a lot about something that is just so normal to care about, human connection. And the best moments of our life usually revolve around other people. Some of the best moments in life could be when you feel comfortable around other people with shared experiences. And it's common to have social anxiety. We are social beings. It's not easy to feel comfortable with other people. Feeling trust is something that could take time to build or discover, and to varying degrees for different people based on their lived experiences. It's hard to figure out how you fit in with other people or in different types of groups. And generally, it's simply difficult to understand social dynamics. What does someone think about you? I don't know. They never tell me. Are they acting this way towards me because it's something about me? Or is it something about maybe they're just acting out their own stuff, or maybe they're projecting or displacing something onto me? Will this interaction lead to a relationship? I don't know. Will we end up liking each other? Are we going to have conflict? Should I advocate for myself, or should I maintain harmony within the group or within the relationship? Will they like me if they learned about different parts of me that I'm embarrassed about? Okay, you get it. These questions create uncertainty because there's often no clear answer to these questions. And sometimes it can take time for these questions to be answered. So hence, with this uncertainty comes anxiety. And by the way, all of these questions can be applied not only during face-to-face interactions, but they can also happen within the context of online or virtual messaging, which can become even more complicated. So don't beat yourself up if you're feeling social anxiety. It's very common. It is a human experience. We all have it to varying degrees. Some just mask it better than others. In fact, even the most famous or popular people you may know or heard of, they may even be hiding their own social anxiety without you knowing. It's very easily masked. And social anxiety can feel so interfering in our lives. You know, this is where the problem comes into play. It can make an otherwise typical experience feel like you're standing on the edge of a cliff. It can make your mind go blank. It can make you avoid opportunities to connect when ironically, the very thing that you want to do is to connect. Imagine that, avoiding what you actually want because of this anxiety. It's heartbreaking. And so many potential friendships, potential job opportunities, potential romantic partners, even hobbies, sometimes do not come to be simply because of this experience of social anxiety that we may have a hard time grappling with or understanding or working through. And again, social anxiety is very common. Right now, there's tons of youth, young adults of all ages who wish they could be more connected with other people. Now, I want to be clear, social anxiety is not a monster. I don't want this to sound like the emotion of anxiety is your enemy. Rather, we hope through this episode that we can learn about social anxiety. You can learn about yourself, perhaps. And by doing so, you can make some shifts around the way that you experience interactions with other people and social connection. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes with a little bit of courage, a little bit of encouragement, and a little bit of support. We have to see social anxiety for what it is and make sense of it. And it's understandable how you can feel devastated when you don't feel like things are working out socially. But look, life is a long-term process. Hopefully this episode will give you some hope, some ideas that you can take with you in your social life, one day at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time, even one segment or chapter of your life at a time. We are all learning, we are all growing, and it doesn't happen fast. Life requires patience as we grow and as we evolve. So this is part 2. Alexis and I are going to be talking about social anxiety for the second time on this podcast. This time we're in the amazing Cybersound recording studios with our producer, Rob Whitaker. And in this version of the episode, We're going to try to provide you with some ideas that you can consider and perhaps even incorporate into your own therapeutic process or in terms of just your life as you work through social anxiety.
Before we get started, what is the context of today? The reason why Jerry and I really wanted to come back and revisit social anxiety is because right now we're in November of 2025, and in our practices and even in our personal lives, we've been interacting with so many people who are describing their experience of feeling really just minimized in different social situations, minimized in a way that they feel like they don't always feel comfortable fully expressing and being themselves, or they're not even sure how to interact in different social settings or context in general, whether it's a student at school in a traditional educational environment, whether it's somebody at work, somebody in, we're going into the Thanksgiving holiday as we're recording, thinking about going into a familial environment where you might not see people all the time and all of a sudden you're going to be together, or maybe you're going to be alone in a smaller, more intimate setting. And in all these different contexts, it can feel really uncomfortable, right? There's a lot of things that come up. So in the context of today, as we're talking about social anxiety, we're going to paint this picture even further. But just before we get started, I really want us to think about and reflect on these different situations where some kind of social anxiety, some anticipation of being judged in a social setting or environment makes us feel stifled, makes us feel like we have to inhibit and pause or maybe hide or mask parts of ourselves because it just feels so uncomfortable for so many different reasons. So before we dive more into social anxiety, Jerry, I'm going to put you on the spot a lot here today because you're the expert in this from your mental health background. And we're going to be very careful not to go into professor role, but I'm sure part of that will come out here too. Can you define actually what social anxiety is? Because as we're even introducing this episode, in my head, I keep thinking about how I often teach teachers and caregivers and parents not to always use the word anxiety, right? We've talked about that a lot here on the podcast, that sometimes if we give this word or label too much power, it can sometimes feel more clinical than maybe our experience actually is. But for social anxiety, it's actually a pretty common term that almost any of us can experience across our lives, even if we're not diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the definition of social anxiety and maybe the differentiation and how we even use that term.
That's really interesting. Even when I work with people who have social anxiety in a clinical setting in therapy, the word social anxiety actually does not come up very often in our work together.
Oh, so interesting.
Yeah, I would say it comes up in the context of monitoring their progress. How was the anxiety, week by week or month to month?
Colloquially, we talk a lot about I feel socially anxious or, this is coming up for me just in a normal conversation with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the reason how I think I talk about therapy with my students and how I understand therapy for myself is that, you want to break down something abstract and something that feels overwhelming into smaller parts. And when we say social anxiety, like I said, it's not a monster. It's not this thing that's your enemy. There's parts to what the experience actually is. And so some of those parts, if we were to actually break them down, and this is where the work comes in, right? If you just say, I have social anxiety, there's not much you can do about that, right? Maybe you just want to take some deep breaths or kind of try to get rid of it. But in terms of therapy, that's not necessarily just what therapy is. Therapy is to try to understand, where is this coming from? What are the parts of it? And how can we begin to resolve, what's contributing to it? And how can you begin to work through and overcome, the stuck points that you get into when it comes to your life situations?
So far I'm hearing it's important to label your experience and describe what's happening for you, but not just to stop there with the label or the description.
Yes. I mean, certainly in the therapeutic setting, that's so important. If, my job is not to just basically just talk about the fact that they have social anxiety, that's not going to really do much for them. My job is to help them to begin to talk openly and honestly about all the components. So there's many components, right? There's aspects of, the thought process that people go into situations with. We've talked about this on the first episode, but social anxiety happens before a social situation in terms of people will kind of ruminate and in some ways obsess over how a situation might go, and they kind of overly prepare, or they think so much about it, trying to prepare themselves for the situation. It happens before a situation.
This is another term that I use frequently, again, even if somebody's not diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, is like this anticipatory stress or anxiety, like worrying about something that may or may not happen in the future.
Exactly. And again, like, I won't just say, you're anxious coming into the situation. I'm like, okay, tell me what is actually going through your head. What is your mind trying to do leading up to this situation? And, oftentimes it revolves around some sort of wanting to feel safer, or wanting to feel more in control of a situation that oftentimes does not feel in control. Because as I said in the introduction, social situations are so uncertain.
Yeah.
There's no a math equation to explain how every social situation is going to go. There's so much nuance to it. And so there's a sense of not liking lack of control and feeling, the worry. And again, like, worry is different than just feeling anxiety. Worry is a thought process. The worry is this fear of ultimate judgment, right?
Yeah.
About being excluded and judged, right? Those are as human beings, two of our biggest fears that we have. Up there with other physical harms that could be done to us, like feeling socially rejected and judged, devastating for people, right? Understandably so. And by the way, like I said, we come out of the womb worrying about this stuff. Like kids, you watch kids play, they feel like they're being mistreated or people don't like them, like they're crying. They're crying for a reason, not because they're being childish, because we're all adult kids ourselves. We feel the same way in different ways, and we just find ways to cope with it. And part of therapy is to understand all these thought processes that go into it.
And the children too, they probably don't have the language yet to articulate their experience, going back to the importance of describing what your experience is to be able to know what to do with it next.
Absolutely.
So as you were talking about uncertainty, there's the token analogy of anxiety being like a wave, right? Thinking about the ocean. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, even fishermen and surfers and, folks that do work or play on the water, like they even care about the tides, right? They don't want to just go in and then all of a sudden a tidal wave comes, right? They're anticipating and planning and understanding the different shifts and changes that, they could be unpredictable, but there's some predictability to it. And it's so similar to social settings too, right? Like if you're going into a classroom, you can expect that there's going to be other students there. You can expect there might be a coach or a guide or a teacher, right? I'm just thinking of like all the different possibilities of what you can anticipate and expect. So there's like a level of predictability, but can you predict what everybody's going to say, what you're going to be learning every day in every situation and context? And you could, again, contextually, we could think about this in so many different settings. But, the idea of being able to control and predict everything, even though sometimes it makes people feel safer, is really impossible.
Totally. That's why we went to a music concert. We went to a music concert once, and the artist kind of had to stop the show because of some technical difficulties. And she's like, "Yeah, I was using AI for therapy." And she's like, "But don't use it too much." And the reason I'm saying this is because, there's a reason that I'm glad that people are acknowledging that, because if you try to obsess over something and try to control, like, how to predict something, right? I'm just imagining if you have social anxiety, you're going to try to predict and control every aspect of what you're going to go into a situation with to understand it. And like you said, like we're saying, you can't, right? And so a big part of working with people in therapy is like, okay, we want to know what the fear is. What's the worry, the concern, whatever you want to call it. What's your concern? What's your worry? What's your fear? The different words resonate with different people. But oftentimes it comes down to, like I said, I'm going to be judged and I'm going to be excluded, right? Which is truly heartbreaking for people. And so as it relates to anticipating the future, you're anticipating ways to prevent that from happening. And part of therapy is to understand what is a real valid threat, or at least to what extent is it a valid threat, and what is a more irrational or perhaps unnecessary concern that you're having about how you potentially could be hurt in a situation, right? And so there's different ways to look at it. Like, as I said, it is hurtful to feel like people are judging you or treating you poorly. But number one, it doesn't always happen the way that you expect it to happen, and it may not always happen as much as you think it's going to happen. But number two, and this is kind of the hard part about therapy, is like kind of accepting that it might actually happen. So there's really two parts to it. One is to try to almost like recalibrate your brain in the way that you perceive situations so that you're not overly sensitive to cues or to ideas that people are actually treating you poorly. The classic example is like, the person, didn't smile at you that day. That means they hate you, right? It's possible that they don't like you, right? But it's also possible that they're just having a terrible day and they just don't want to be bothered by anybody. And it has nothing to do with you, right? So again, there's two parts to it. Is kind of when people are anticipating worry in a social situation, one is just really getting used to what thinking traps you get into. Like, are you often assuming the worst? Are you often making generalizations about what's happening and assuming it's about you, assuming it means people are judging you? And then secondly, like I said, also, we have to also really, truly learn how to accept that we may be judged. Like, we don't want to have a false reality that nobody's ever going to judge you and that you're always going to be treated perfectly well. And, there's ways to help people with that as well.
Okay, so I feel like between your introduction and your explanation just there, we can end the episode and be done. But there's so many threads that I want to pull on and talk a little bit more about. I can't let the AI comment go without talking about it for a moment, because there's a reason why people are asking AI for their opinion to predict what possibly could be happening and going on. And, despite what your thoughts or opinions might be on it, like you, the audience, the society in general, right? There are people who are inquiring about things that they don't feel comfortable asking other humans about.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
So this idea of the artist you're referring to saying, oh, I was asking my AI therapist these questions. I think that's a really important point that I want us to double click on in a moment. But I want to talk about how, I think there are a lot of questions in predicting what's going to happen in the future. And I just want to also add that I don't think that even AI models and technology can predict every possible outcome.
Social situation.
Especially in social situations,
No.
right? Because, from a human perspective, there's so many different little aspects of our lives that lead us to different trajectories or different experiences or different interactions that that the way you wake up in the morning can dictate if you smile at somebody when you first see them, when you leave your home.
Yeah.
Right. I'll give you a good example. There's somebody who works in my building who I am so grateful for, because sometimes I'm walking out the door in the morning and he starts cheering and clapping, and it just shifts and changes your whole day. And then there's some days where he might not be in that great of a mood, and not that it makes me feel bad, because I usually try to cheer him up the way he does for me. But, that one interaction can dictate the rest of my interactions for the day sometimes. So when we think about the prediction of and trying to gain more information, there's something really important there that I want to just validate for anybody listening and for any human who might be uncertain in social situations, that there are so many different examples of what could happen. Variability is, as we say in the UDL world, the variability is the norm. It's not the exception. And if we are expecting that we need to live up to some standard all the time, we're never going to meet that standard. So of course, this makes sense that, again, going back to the context of where we are right now today, that we're hearing so much about people feeling uncomfortable in social situations, it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And when you think about the way social media over the past 10 years has almost narrated social situations or narrated norms. You know, like there's memes.
Dictated.
There's memes about things. There's just like people saying, this is what this is. If this happens, this is what this is, right? And there is like great benefit to people doing that because we can now give language perhaps to like bad things that happen between people, right? Which is great.
Let's say uncomfortable or perhaps negatively emotional impact kind of settings and situations. I don't love good or bad scenarios.
Well, I mean, what I'm pointing out here is that, like there's a whole spectrum of interpersonal interactions, right? And some can be considered, abusive, right?
I like that language, yeah.
We need to acknowledge, like, no, that stuff's not okay.
Yes.
Right? And I think, and at the same time, like when we begin to label everything, and this, like I said, this is a spectrum. People can even have labels about what's cool, what's in, what's out, what's a fad, what's not a fad, what's this, what's that, right? When everything is being fed to you about what is this or that. And by the way, when we were growing up, we would see that because this is just part of life, but it wasn't like every second of our day. It was like maybe MTV was on for like an hour.
When we were allowed to watch MTV, right?
Yeah, right. My friend sent me something funny the other day. He's, something about like, it was like a Adam Sandler movie quote. He's like, that joke had to last us 5 years.
Back in the 1900s.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as our friend said yesterday. But, to the point of this is like, so what I'm saying is I think this idea that everything is labeled now and kids are like, that's this is that. I think it creates pressure to feel like you're going to do something wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I hear this a lot as like, young people saying like, I don't want to like do something that's judged as weird or different, or I don't want to make that person uncomfortable if I go up and talk to them. I don't want to like break their boundary or like, this or that. And I don't blame people for feeling that way, right? There's this kind of like hypervigilance around like what you should or shouldn't do in a social situation.
Well, we talked about this in a previous episode that my hypothesis on part of this is that we are so hyper-focused and sensitive on being mindful not to do harm.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Right, which I think is a really beautiful idea and concept. And maybe we feel this more in the Northeast because it's a big part of conversations that we have here, especially in New England and the Boston area. But I think it's an important point that like the intention is not to do harm to others.
Right.
But in turn, it almost ends up doing harm to ourselves because we could fragilize the situation. We could walk on eggshells and be nervous.
Yeah.
And perhaps over-inhibit
yes.
where we're not actually engaging in curiosity to show kindness. And I think that is a big part of this. And we talked about this in the previous episode about social anxiety, that like even us as professors or, the people that those might go to for answers in some area and form of expertise that we have, that a lot of people, and us included in different situations at different points of our career, would feel like we have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
So like if you don't think you know enough, and it might come across as offensive or potentially triggering or harmful, sometimes people are just withholding and not even talking about anything.
Yeah, disconnection happens.
That becomes this disconnection. So all of this to say is that it makes sense why social anxiety has become so prevalent, I think, in society and across generations.
Yeah.
Because you mention a lot of kids and social media and young people's exposure, but I would say this is across the board.
Yeah, and it's not new. I think it's just amplified.
Absolutely.
And so, like, I've thought a lot about this, because people come to me with this challenge and, and it's also just the human experience that we all experience. And so one way I've tried to help people to grapple with this is your intentions are what matter. So if you're going to, approach someone because you want to maybe make a friend or you're interested in someone, like if your intention is simply just to be kind and get to know them and truly just be kind and get to know them, right? Pretty basic, fundamental intentions. There's nothing else. You don't get ahead of yourself. You're not like, oh, they have to be my best friend or this or that, or like there's no agenda, right? Other than like, oh, they seem like an interesting person. I'd like to, just cross paths with them, get to know them. If your intention is that, you don't really have to worry so much about, oh, am I going to make them uncomfortable or this or that? You're going to get feedback, right? I mean, you'll find out, right, if they want to continue to interact with you or not. And that's part of the uncertainty that you got to grapple with. We all have to. But breaking the ice is often the hardest part with social anxiety. People have a hard time breaking the ice to interact with somebody new.
I'm going to press pause because I do want to talk about breaking the ice and more of these like ideas of how to help.
Yeah.
But I still want to double click on what you're saying here, because I would argue that in our society, and I work with a lot of, young people thinking about college or a new career, where every move they make has to be so plan full because they only see the goal and outcome in mind.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Instead of appreciating the process and the journey of learning until they get to that point. And I have this conversation frequently. In fact, I just had it with my friend and colleague who's here today. And I was talking about this idea of a goal and that I'm trying not to use that term as often or without describing context. And it's difficult for me because in the Universal Design for Learning world, the UDL world, we talk a lot about goals, being clear about our goals.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding in my work and in life in general is that we are all assigning goals to all the things we think we need to do as if it's like a checklist or like, I need to get here before I get there. And if I don't do this, then I'm not going to experience that. And it becomes more pressure that we lose sight of like every step to get to that goal.
Yeah, I love this. So actually Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Act really speaks to this because it suggests, hey, like pull back from so much focus and obsession around your goals or outcomes and focus more on what your values are. And you speak a lot about this with your clients as well. And so as it relates to what I was saying before about intentions, get clear about what your intentions are as it relates to people and interactions with people.
I'm going to take a step further because I think we all as humans get caught up in my intention is just good. And we could all justify almost anything we do as a good intention if we wanted to.
No kidding. No, that's true.
And it could be problematic because it's not always going to lead to a positive outcome that's going to be healthy and helpful to everybody and ourselves. But I think, your point is a really important one. And I am noticing, and this is coming up in so many conversations, again, in work and in life, that a lot of us are losing a sense of ourselves. And I do this work frequently, and I've been doing a deeper dive into it lately, just at this phase of my life, where I think it's so important for us to take inventory about who we are. Like genuinely, like not the things I like, the things I've done or participated in, or the people that are around me or the stuff I have, but like truly and authentically who we are as people. Because I think we get so sucked into the things we do and the people that are around us that we get subsumed by the stuff around us that we lose sense of ourselves. And I honestly think that this is a big proponent of why we're so anxious in social situations because we're not clear about ourselves. Well, yes, everything becomes a goal because the intention might be, I need to network with this person because they know so-and-so or they might know a job. And believe me, I'm a big proponent of that in my work. And I encourage a lot of young people to just talk to others, to create a network, to just learn about other people's lives, to gain different perspective that they might not have yet. And so like the goal can get caught up in that, but the process is really like the meat of it. But I think that a lot of the anxiety comes from, I don't really know who I am.
Right.
How am I going to relate to other people?
Or communicate that to other people.
Right. Yeah. And I think, again, another part of a conversation I'm so blessed to have with friends and colleagues that I had earlier today too was, we go around labeling who we are. Like saying, I am this, I am that, I come from this is what I need. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to share that articulately, which we didn't, when we were younger, we didn't really do that.
Totally.
But I think we get lost in the labels. that we lose who we really are. And I think it's really important for us to honor and appreciate and take some time, not just to look at like a social media thread or a list of things we've done or our resumes to describe an experience and fully express who we are. Because I think we're getting lost in, again, those goals, those checkpoints, that profile.
Yes.
Because that's become such a part of our life, is this front-facing persona of ourselves that it makes it more difficult to interact with and connect with people. You know, as us old people say, like IRL, in the real world, in real life, it's difficult to be able to really fully appreciate and understand that. And I think this is leading to a lot of social confusion, I will call. You know, I know we're talking about social anxiety, but I think there's probably a precursor to it in this social confusion, because there's a lack of an ownership, appreciation, or authenticity in ourselves of who we are.
Well, I mean, think about it. It's kind of a vicious cycle, right? If you're anxious about fitting in, and therefore your goal, as we say, is to just fit in and be liked, you're going to do everything you can to appear that you're going to be liked or fit in, perhaps at the expense of being your authentic self. And also probably driven by a ton of anxiety, because you're always going to be trying to figure out how to manipulate ways to get people to like you or how to fit in, right? I'm not saying that like is all bad. Like, you know, like fitting in and like finding ways to kind of fit into the norm of what other people are doing, whether, you know, how they're dressing, how they're talking, whatever. Like I'm not saying that's bad. And we're both not saying that's bad. It's kind of just normal, right? I mean, it's part of like living within a group or within a society, is like finding a ways to not like just be like an isolated person who doesn't like have any way of, you know.
No, that's the opposite of what we're trying to say.
Yeah, right. But what you're saying, I think, is, you know, who you are at your core. Maybe the best way to do that is to think about what your values are.
Absolutely.
Because values are not like something that, you know, you go around showcasing in like a tangible way. They're just inside of you. And they're kind of just ways of navigating the world, right?
Yeah, in an act we call it like the compass almost, right? Like it's what guides you in the decisions you make and the interactions you have and the experiences you have. But I think, you know, it's interesting thinking about values, and again, going back to that idea of we label ourselves and we lead with our labels or our resume. And, you know, I keep hearing in my head what we tell, you know, young people as they're learning to write. You know, show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Right? Show it. Live it, experience it, prove it.
Just embody it.
Right? Don't just say it. Yeah.
You don't have to perform it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like that goes back, like when you're interacting with someone, if you know, and your values can adapt and change. They're not like fixed things. So like I think sometimes people can latch really strongly onto a value and be like, this is now who I am, and everything kind of revolves around it maybe too rigidly, and that could be sometimes a problem if it's too rigid.
I'm gonna put you behind the lectern for a second. Because I even find, and I've been trained in ACT and I integrate it into a lot of the work I do. But when I have to define what a value is for the people I'm working with, sometimes I find that it's difficult, right? Because there's a value, you know, I value nice things versus I value relationships. Can you define a little bit of what you mean when you say values? And I'm saying this out loud in case anybody else has a similar question.
Well, I'll put this in the context of someone with social anxiety. If like if someone with social anxiety says, I really value being popular. Okay, well, I would ask them, well, what does being popular do for you?
Yeah, what's behind it?
Exactly. And so what is the value behind that? And if you kind of peel the onion back, the layers of the onion back, you realize they don't really care about being popular as much as they want to actually feel connected, and maybe like there's a sense of value in the relationship.
Yes.
You feel valued, you value someone else, right? I mean,
can we highlight that for a minute? That you value being connected, you value relationship.
Yeah, I mean, there's no better evidence than people who become famous. Like they get everything they ever wanted and they're unhappy because maybe they don't have real, genuine connection with people.
Not everybody, but
not everybody, right?
A lot of the stories you hear, right, either in interviews or their memoirs,
absolutely
often repeat that story.
I mean, there's people who work their entire lives, you know, maybe, you know, that's a value-driven thing that they want to work hard, provide for their family, whatever it is, but they spend their entire life working so hard they have no real relationship with their family or this or that, right? I'm not talking bad about people. I'm just saying this is what happens. And I think at the end of the day, what we really value at the end of the day is connection. And we have to be clear about, is what we're doing leading to connection or not? And so when it comes to social anxiety, I think that this can help in terms of a tangible step of how people can help themselves. Is like really think deeply about who are you trying to impress, who are you trying to please, who are you trying to get to like you, and how is that working? Is this making you feel good? Is this actually leading to a real relationship that you actually want? Or is it just kind of a dopamine hit, like, oh, that cool person said I had a cool jacket today. I feel so good about myself now, right? That's not genuine confidence, and that's also not genuine connection. That person may not really be a good fit for you in terms of your relationships that you're seeking. So part of this is taking a deep dive into yourself of like, what kind of relationship you want? What type of people do you feel connect well with you, as opposed to, trying to fit in with something which could be very tricky. Like, let's take, sports as an example. Like, maybe you're just an athlete and everybody around you is kind of this like type A, hyper masculine or hyper assertive person, and you're just not that. You're just kind of like more of a laid back, kind person, right? That it could be conflicting for you, right? To figure out how you're going to fit into a group like that. But that's not to say that you should change who you are or pretend to be something that you're not. I think a lot of socializing is to figure out how can you be yourself in a way that's genuine while also still finding a way to connect with other people. I think, both things could happen.
Okay, I just noted 3 things because my working memory is taxed at the moment, because you're lighting up so many parts of my brain of different things that are really resonating. So we're gonna break apart some of what you said a little bit, and I want to start with this question that I have, because I'm finding myself thinking I should know the answer to this, but I want to say it out loud and ask you. And if anybody in the audience knows better than either of us, please let us know. I was thinking about what you said about what do we value in connections and how our values might change over time. And I was thinking about, because as a developmentalist and having a lot of training in developmental psychology, I'm thinking about a lot of these stage theories. And I was thinking about how I was wondering if, because I don't know the answer to this, is there a stage theory for connection? Like understanding the different levels and experiences that we may have across different aspects of our life in terms of connection. Because we talk about attachment, and a lot of times when we talk about connection and development, we talk about like the negative, the detrimental aspects of connection rather than the positive aspects. And connection is one of the 6 C's of positive youth development, and it shows up in a lot of the positive psychology literature. But I'm trying to think of like, is there anything that describes, and I don't think it would ever fully explain, but anything that describes different levels of connection that would be beneficial across the lifespan. Do you know about that?
No, I love that, and I actually made some notes about just that, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Did you? Good. Yeah,
because we're talking about how to connect to people, and I think you're right. It's almost like saying what love is. Like, how do you explain love? Like, and they say there's different love languages, right?
It's so, like Carl Jung's work on be love, which I love so much. We should have a whole episode just on that.
Yeah, that sounds nice. And also, as we're saying, like connection could come in so many forms. And in my opinion, when I'm working with people in therapy, I'm always trying to think, what are different ways of getting your needs met? Because it's not always like the one thing you think it is.
Yes.
So as I went back, to the other example, going back to the other example, like if you're just trying to impress one person to make connection, it's like, how much energy are you spending trying to do that? And that could come with romantic partners too. Whatever it is that, you could be expending so much thought and energy into something that's just not serving you. And so diversify the way you connect with people. And that can come in different forms with different people. And how great is this for humanity that we can all find different people, can find different ways to connect with each other. And we can go through some examples of what that looks like at a young level and an older level.
Well, before you do that, can I ask a question? Because you were talking about how you can kind of get stuck in thinking about what these connections might be like or what you're trying to get from them. And I just want to differentiate. Again, it's going back to the definition of social anxiety and anxiety in general. Because I was picturing as you were describing that, a person who is starting a new relationship, whether it's romantic or not, and they just are constantly replaying all the interactions that they had with that person or what potentially could happen, and how when we just get really stuck in our minds and ruminating or overthinking things, that's kind of like, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong / reinforce what the accuracy is of this.
Yep.
This is where I think anxiety, it goes from like healthy planning and preparing for a relational connection to anxiety.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, let's look at it from an exposure therapy standpoint. So if you're going to go into a situation, you're going to try to plan and think and think and think. And at the end of the day, you just have to do the thing, right?
But planning is helpful though, isn't it? Like a little bit of preparation, a practice.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're worried about communication style and things like that.
It's an executive function strategy.
Yes,
I think
thank you for validating that.
It's a great way. Like, okay, here's some things I can talk about. Here's some things I've been doing. If you have a hard time remembering stories that you want to share, it's great. It's helpful.
Helpful until it's not.
Helpful until it's not.
Until it takes over.
So think about it like from a sports and performance perspective. So an athlete goes into a game. If they're thinking so much that they become worried and they lose their confidence to just be in the situation and just kind of figure out what to do in the moment rather than trying to plan it, they're not going to play very well. And the reason for that is because if you constantly think and think and think, you're distracting yourself and you're not in the flow of what's actually happening. And so it's really important to begin to expose yourself. And I'm not saying you just, do the hardest thing and, like go on a million dates or do this or that, like immediately. What I'm saying is once you expose yourself to a situation where you get socially anxious, you're going to learn so much about yourself.
Well, I think I want to actually press pause on that because you're talking about like the way in which overthinking can impact performance. I was actually thinking about the step before that, like even just getting totally caught in like our thoughts about something that hasn't even happened yet. That's still anticipatory anxiety and worry about it.
Well, it's all connected to what I'm saying though.
Totally.
So imagine like when you're an athlete, you already know how to play the sport. And so part of that is having the courage and the trust that you know what you're doing. And so if you don't believe that you can be in a situation and just do the best that you can, you're going to try to over prepare and over plan, because you lost trust in your ability to just do your best and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So it's a lack of acceptance.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I actually talked about this on the first episode about social anxiety when I was talking about when I, go out and do a big talk, whether it's like a small school locally or if it's like a big organization or a keynote speech, and sometimes I'm in a completely unfamiliar context, a different part of the world where I don't even know exactly how the systems run yet because I haven't gotten to know them enough yet. And for me, sometimes when I over-prepare, overthink about something, I get hooked on what I was planning to do versus just being present in the moment. Right? That acceptance of like, I am prepared and ready versus like, have I worked and reworked and overworked all the things? And I think I was just focusing on, because I don't think it gets discussed enough, the in-between, right? And I love talking about the in-between. I talk about it from the meditation Buddhist mindset that I talk about with my teacher of the bardo, like the in-between, almost like the in-between your in-breath and your out-breath. Like there's this spot in between that's just kind of uncomfortable. It's not necessarily that anything's really happening, but I think those are the moments where we can get trapped in our own thoughts.
Yeah. So
that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, totally. And again, I think that if you're aiming for something, as we said before, don't aim for controlling everything, aim for confidence in these situations. And the only way to do that is to be in a situation where you expose yourself to being social that you're afraid of. And afterwards, don't ruminate about what went wrong, because that's what people's social anxiety will do. Everybody does this. Oh my God, why did I do that? I wish I could have done this differently. What were they thinking when they said that? You just analyze everything. That is not the point. That's not going to help you. That's just going to make you more anxious and just kind of maybe even depressed. Instead, what I'm suggesting is use that situation of being in an anxious situation, in a situation that makes you anxious, and reflect on how your mind was working.
Mm-hmm.
That is so much important information that you will learn that you could not learn unless you actually are in this situation.
Right.
Right? You can't really have an avatar and predict how you're going to feel, how you're going to think, what you're going to do.
I was just going to say that. Could we potentially play out and role play all of these situations to figure out exactly what we need to do in the future?
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is you actually learn about how you react emotionally and cognitively and behaviorally. So as an example, right, you can say, okay, I was in this group of people and we were all hanging out and like they were saying jokes and I really wanted to say a joke and I didn't say anything because I was too afraid that they wouldn't like my joke, right? Okay. Come back. Let's talk about that. This is great that you were in the situation. Like, it's not a failure that you didn't make your joke. This is all just information. Let's learn from it. What was going through your mind? How did you begin to second guess yourself when you were about to say the joke and then you stopped yourself? How did you feel after that? What do you want to do next time? You know, what were you thinking about? What were you focused on? Were you looking for cues that they might not like you, right? Were you expecting them not to like you, or whatever it is, right? How did you feel going into the situation in the first place, right? So all that information is great. And it's not about the outcome. Like, just when you're reflecting on social situations, don't ruminate on the outcome or what actually happened. It's more about what you're reflecting about, how you felt, what you were thinking, your approach, your goals, your values, your intention, you know, what you learned about how to interact with people. That's all it is. It's all learning.
I don't usually promote a lot of tools and resources because, there's never one thing that's going to help with everything. But I am going to name drop for a second because there's this beautiful children's book that I use all the time across, going back to developmental stages, across every stage of the lifespan, right? Regardless of how old somebody is. This story always lands, especially if you set it up properly. It's a children's book by Julia Cook, who has a lot of really great explanations of different scenarios that especially kids might experience. And it breaks things down in a really nice way. But the book is called Thanks for the Feedback. And it's a book where the main character, RJ, is having all these different interactions throughout his day at school, on the soccer field. And people are either giving him feedback that he's doing well or giving him feedback that he can improve. And in his head, like, the story goes over and over. I won't share too much to spoil it, but, he keeps getting stuck in his own head. And he says, as soon as these words come into my head, it turns into like a pool of all these different things that get him disorganized and dysregulated, that he doesn't feel comfortable when feedback comes in. And ultimately, the advice his dad gives him is that, hey, RJ, feedback is just information that helps us to learn and grow. And as we've talked about several times on the podcast, and we talk about all the time with our clients and each other, is that a lot of folks have a very difficult time taking feedback.
Or giving it,
right, in an effective way, that it makes us feel very uncomfortable. And essentially in social situations, it's all feedback.
Yeah.
Right? Did somebody laugh at my joke?
Yeah.
Did they smile when they saw me? Did they talk to me for a long time? Did they not? Did they avoid me? Like, should I have done or said something different, like you were giving in the example? Yeah. It's a lot of feedback. And I would argue, as we talked about in the first episode of season 7 about regulation, that the amount of information that we're getting on a daily basis is creating so much noise in our existence as we navigate through each day, that it makes it more and more difficult to filter out the noise, to appreciate the feedback that does help us to learn and grow.
Totally. And I would say, if you're focused so much on that feedback all the time, you're probably going to get even more anxious.
Absolutely. Great point.
Because you're just constantly monitoring, which is, again, like, think of an athlete. You can't just monitor things all the time. You have to just act.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to be in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where that, again, like, aim for confidence in being yourself if you can be in every situation, just continuously aim to feel self-assured and present with the people, with your values about how you want to be with them. And hopefully your values are, have some positivity to them about how you want to treat other people. But again, like that overthinking is a lot. And it's a long-term process about overcoming social anxiety, about working through it. It gets better over time when you work on being consistent and you stop worrying about the outcomes, right? If you continuously think, oh, I'm only successful if I make a friend or if this person wants to date me or if this or that, right? If you continuously think that way, you're just always going to be, measuring up against some outcome that you're going to be disappointed and you're going to, oh, I'm disappointed, therefore I'm going to think worse about myself. And then the worst thing that I think could happen, one of the worst things that could happen with social anxiety is you begin to judge your entire life and pity yourself and say like, oh, like my life is so much worse than everybody else. And then you begin to act as if that's true. And so it's really, really, really important to be careful about falling over that slippery slope, about beginning to just judge your life in general, because then you lose all of your confidence and you project that onto how you interact with other people.
So I want to go back to this idea of expecting to fit in with other people's groups and situations. And I think that one of the other aspects of social anxiety that I see showing up, especially for young people, college-aged, young adults, right? Literally across the lifespan. I would argue that probably even adults are experiencing this too, is that whether it's because of social media or not, I think there's a perception of I need to be friends with a group like this, and this is what it should look like.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's oftentimes this expectation that people put so much into just achieving that as a goal that they lose track of the fact that sometimes relationships and interactions you can't put an expectation on one person or one group to be everything for you. I think this is actually similar in relationships, and I hope we can have an episode on this specifically too. There's a couple experts that come to mind that I would love to have this conversation with, because I think we put too much pressure on one person or one group being everything for us, right? Like this. I'm going to just use relationships as an example because I think it's easier to consolidate. Like my partner is going to be my best friend. We're going to help each other financially. We're going to help each other emotionally. We're going to distribute different responsibilities in the household. We're going to go on all of our trips together. We're going to do all these things that I love to do.
To the extreme is just like unrealistic.
Well, not even. I would argue that a lot of people are looking for one person to fill all of those roles. And I think that's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves to find that ideal and also to put on somebody else. And I think the same goes with any relationship. You can replace that example with my boss, my mentor, my best friend, my colleague, that you expect, this ideal version of who they are and what they're going to do to help support you or what they're going to serve as a part of your life. And the reality is that as humans, none of us are going to ever really live up to all of that all the time.
So let's bring that back to connection then. So let's think about it this way. There's so many different ways to connect with different people.
Yes.
So if you have one relationship, you can think, well, here's how I can connect with them in different ways. Here's other people in my life, and maybe think more critically about how you can engage in different ways, right? And connection is everything. It could be, let's go, do an activity together. This is the person I have jokes with. This is the person I have fun with. This is the person I feel respected by. This is the person I learn from. And it can all be within the same person in some ways, but like if you can diversify the way in which you see what connection is, not only with various people, but even with the same person, so you don't feel like everything's kind of built in this one thing about, what it's going to do for you or the other person.
I think that goes back to this acceptance and understanding of ourselves as individuals, right? Knowing who we are and accepting ourselves so that we can accept who other people are, instead of like trying to make people into the ideal of who we think they should be and the function of the relationship. Because I would argue that, and from the conversations I have, and it might not be across everybody, but I would imagine, I'm not going to say argue, I would imagine that a lot of people get caught in this I don't know if fantasy is the right word, but caught up in this imagination of what they're aiming for in different social situations that they're trying to achieve in relationships, that you can get really caught on. This isn't exactly the way I wanted it to be. Therefore, something's going wrong in this interaction socially that perpetuates this anxiety around taking a risk and being in different social settings because it didn't work exactly the way you expected it last time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I would suggest that people communicating better will make this a lot easier for everybody.
How so? Give me some examples.
I think part of social anxiety also is just not feeling confident that you can say what you want to say.
Yes.
And that goes on both sides, right? Let's say you want to, get closer with someone and they don't necessarily want to get necessarily closer, but they still want to maintain friendship, right? If both parties can just communicate about something like that, it's very helpful to release that uncertainty that creates the anxiety in the first place. And I think in any type of social situation, when you feel like if you feel like you don't have the words or you don't feel empowered to speak up and to communicate what you feel like you want to say, it's going to make you so much more anxious in the situation. So part of that is practicing. Part of that is like figuring out how to be clear in what you want to say, how you want to say it. And then also the person on the other end, you just, try to make it easier for the other person too. Like just be clear and be kind and respectful in terms of how you communicate. I think a lot of these kids, I feel so bad for them, like groups of kids or girls or boys, a lot of girls can be relational in this way. They can like exclude someone in such like a way that feels so hurtful. They'll ignore them. They'll kind of like, act as if they're not there. They'll this or that, right? And it's just, it's not a kind way or respectful way of communicating. There's different ways that this could look in social situations, but I think if, on both ends, if communication could happen, it would just make it a lot easier,
So I'm going to press pause and I'm going to bring us back to the definition of social anxiety because I want to give you an opportunity to just succinctly define it and then any other aspects or attributes of social anxiety you want to touch upon. And then can we maybe end with a couple ideas of how we can tune into and support ourselves if we experience social anxiety, maybe how we help to support others who might be exhibiting social anxiety. And I'm going to use this as a plug too, because we talk a lot about social anxiety through the perfectionism episodes too, which, we can talk about here as well, but it might be more helpful for the listeners to dive into those episodes or the original social anxiety episode. But as we conclude this episode, Jared, can you take a minute to, again, succinctly define what social anxiety is? And then let's highlight a couple key aspects. We talked about a few as we went through our conversation today, but maybe we can kind of just share a few to recap as we close things out.
Yeah. So at its core, social anxiety is fear of being judged or excluded from a group or people. And it creates this dynamic where people will have a lot of worry, both leading up to a situation. They'll have a lot of worry in a social situation, and they'll have a lot of worry or perhaps regret after a social situation. And there's a lot of ways that people cope with this uncomfortable feeling. They may avoid situations. I didn't even get into this yet. There's so many ways we can avoid things that are uncomfortable to us. We can not go to a party we're invited to, or we can avoid talking to people who approach us, or we can avoid
classes.
We can avoid classes. We can avoid talking to our teacher. We can avoid, meetings, like literally any
crowds,
even asking for what you want from somebody else, right? And so there's so many ways, and the avoidance gets even so much more subtle. And, this podcast is not going to be able to explain everything about social anxiety. That's why if you want to learn more, go to therapy about it, learn about the nuances of it, not only in therapy, but also about yourself. Like there's so many subtle ways. Like you can be in a conversation with someone and just end the conversation abruptly or quickly, or try to change the subject, or try to avoid the attention on yourself, or try to, act as if you know something that you don't know, or try to portray yourself in a certain way. Like these are all forms of avoidance of being judged, and they're all driven by fear. And life driven by fear is not a very fulfilling life. That's why when you go back to values, you can let your life be driven by values rather than fear. Another part of it is social anxiety and kind of the way people think when they become socially anxious can be very irrational. And it's really, really important not to look at a normal situation. I don't want to use the word normal, but just a situation. An everyday situation, or a situation that is just par for the course for being human, and treating as if, like I said, you're like looking down the edge of a cliff, right? Or as if it's like a make or break situation of your entire life, or as if people care so much about this one thing that like nobody isn't even thinking twice about. And so there's also this like cognitive restructuring around how do you perceive and think about what is actually happening in situations. And there's so many examples of it that, requires you to reflect on yourself and talk to, perhaps a therapist to understand the nuances of it as it relates to yourself. We call these safety behaviors. We call them avoidant behaviors, right? There's different terms for it. But it all feeds into the cycle of social anxiety until we break these patterns. And so that's the cognitive part. And I can go a bit deeper about kind of deeper aspects that contribute that I'd like to get into before we end. But that's kind of the cognitive behavioral aspect of it. And as we talked about in the exposure therapy episodes and the facing your fears and the episode about parenting anxious youth episode, exposure therapy helps because when you avoid something so much, you become more and more and more anxious. The more you avoid something, the more anxious you are because it builds up all these expectations about all these bad things that you think are going to happen. And the reason exposure therapy happens in small doses and kind of gradually building yourself up, you don't have to go to a party, you don't have to give a speech, just do little small acts of bravery. You begin to realize, oh, that's not really as bad as I imagined. Or if it didn't work out, that's totally okay. I can just figure something else out rather than what I wanted to happen. Even if it didn't happen, I can try something else, right? That's kind of like breaking this cycle of avoidance. And by doing so, the anxiety inside of you realizes, oh, I don't need to be activated so much. I don't need to be a 10 out of a 10 all the time because I'm realizing through experience, it's really not what I thought it was. And I'm recalibrating, it's like the alarm inside of you is recalibrating. It's learning from experience that it doesn't need to be triggered so easily and so intensely.
I think to your point before that, even values and the level and amplification of our values across different points in time may change. Our comfort and familiarity with different situations might change. And I just want to emphasize that just because something felt uncomfortable at one point in life does not mean it's always going to be that way every single time or in the future or even ever again. I think we get really stuck on this idea of I tried this, it didn't go well. I gave this speech and, I fell flat or I stumbled. Or I put myself out there and tried to, give somebody my number or introduce myself and they didn't respond the way I wanted to. So therefore, I'm never going to do it again. And I think that's a really slippery slope that I think contextually now it makes sense why that might be amplified because, we've hyper-focused on a lot of it over the past 5 years or so since COVID, since everything became digital. And another point that it's really important to understand and validate, a friend and colleague of ours was talking about something her son said who's in college. She asked him if, do people go out and dance these days? And if there's situations where people are dancing, does anybody ever go up to somebody else and say, hey, do you want to dance with me? And he said no, but his insight was incredibly valuable. And I don't know if we think about this as much as maybe we should. His insight was that nobody wants to dance or do something stupid because everybody has a video camera in their pocket.
Oh, yeah, totally.
That it could be captured. And not only will the people next to you see it, but the whole world could potentially see it.
It makes you feel like everybody knows everybody and therefore everybody knows everything about you.
Exactly. So I want to validate that some of this anxiety does make sense because there are some things that might be intimate or private that get captured and get blown up and shared with the world in a way that is very difficult to erase once things are on the internet or social media.
And not even like a video capture, just it seems like, people are so connected online at least.
Yes.
Everybody might know someone who knows somebody at this point, whereas when we were younger, it's there's benefit to that, right? If someone's really doing terrible things to people, it might be helpful to, for people to be be aware so that,
Right.
but like also if you're just doing normal things that you're embarrassed by, that's like, okay, that's just typical human behavior. And you're like, oh, someone's going to like use that against me in like a negative way because they're
Right.
bored or they're just, letting their insecurities out by being mean to you. It's like, yeah, I get that. That's scary. Think about
Right.
it.
How many silly and stupid things did we do when we were younger that thank God they weren't captured?
Yeah.
Because it could have blown up and become something bigger. Or you get embarrassed once, but actually it diffuses and doesn't matter a couple days later because nobody remembers it.
Totally.
Versus it being captured and solidified in some digital way. So I want to validate the context of why social anxiety might feel so heavy and be so prevalent now.
Yeah.
And also, Jerry, if you want to share some more of that nuance that you wanted to capture, I would like to also, get to that hope part of like, hey, there are some things we could do. I love your example of thinking about exposures, doing small exposures every day, whether it's, ordering something at a cafe or saying hello to somebody that you've never met before, or just simply passing a smile on someone that you pass on the street.
Yeah.
Or another example I always say, and I'm just going to emphasize this so I don't forget myself before the end of this episode. If you see something that you like or you appreciate, don't just hold on to it in your head. Share it out loud.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's an exposure and practice in communicating and connecting with somebody.
And it's a nice way to connect with people too. You remember things about people and you bring it up. Like that makes people feel valued and important.
Absolutely.
And if you're worried about being judged, you might become too self-centered in how you think about things too. Like part of this is like, stop thinking about yourself so much. I'm serious.
Nobody else is thinking about you as much as you're thinking about yourself.
Everyone does this. I'm not judging the people who do this. It's just like, it's important to realize, wait, I'm actually becoming self-centered here. Like I need to stop thinking about myself so much.
We're not in the Truman Show.
No, right. You're not, and so I like to, categorize 3 ways to help people with social anxiety. The first is more of a cognitive behavioral standpoint, when we talked about changing the way you think and perceive situations, exposure to take small steps to, face the thing you're afraid of and again, do it in a way that you're building confidence. Don't do it with like, oh, I have to make this friend. I have to make this situation happen. Like there's no end result. The only thing you care about is living your values out and being more confident and realizing that your worries are not founded in reality a lot of times.
Process.
That's the way you can kind of recalibrate the way that your brain is processing to realize you don't have to be so anxious. Right? By learning through experience, changing your perceptions and changing your thought process, right? That's a cognitive behavioral standpoint. That's number 1. Number 2, we talked about this, learning how to be yourself. And that's a lifelong process. It's not like it's going to come naturally or easily or quickly. Learn how to be comfortable with who you are. If you don't feel comfortable with who you are, how do you expect anybody? You're not going to expect other people to be comfortable with you either.
Well, I would also add that if you're not comfortable with who you are, that's a signal to maybe find some assistance in helping you get clear about who you are or who you want to be.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the other beauty in humanity is that we also can choose our trajectory a lot of times, where we can find some specialized and expert support to help guide us, right? And I think that also is sometimes lost in the fear of connecting and talking to others
being
vulnerable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the only way to like yourself and be comfortable with yourself, there's no other way but to begin to become vulnerable, even with yourself or with other people, with someone you can begin to trust, which is the irony here. This is why some people with social anxiety don't get help, is because they're too afraid to be vulnerable in therapy and they don't go to therapy sessions.
I was just going to add too that I think sometimes the things, at least that I hear in my work and even personally through conversations, that people don't like sometimes is more habits or behaviors they don't like versus just inherent traits. Like sometimes, it depends, right? I'm not going to generalize and say for everybody, this is usually what happens. But, the majority of what I hear, at least anecdotally, are people who don't necessarily like certain behaviors or habits that often are learned behaviors, right? Which as an executive function coach and educational therapist, I will say that those are aspects of our life that we can work on.
Yeah.
We can think differently about. There are other possibilities, even if we've been doing things forever.
Yeah.
Like I said, I work across the lifespan with people of all ages. This work of reframing, and I call it rewiring our brains a little bit to be able to do things differently.
Yeah.
We know from neuroplasticity that in our understanding of neuroscience that our brains are plastic. They can shift and change with identification of the habit we want to change, practice, and some cognitive restructuring through the practice to be able to make these changes. But I think, to your point, Jerry, I think people fear being vulnerable because they might not have faith, or they might not have heard an experience where people have made these changes in their life. They might feel like, oh, this is just how I'm going to be. This is just who I am. Instead of being able to say, as you and I constantly tell people, hey, if this is really bothering you, there's something we could do with it, right? This means it's a work we can do. Doesn't mean it's going to be a huge 180 to change who you are, but we can work on some of these patterns of behavior and some of these aspects of life or habits that we have to be able to, we call it workable. It's workable.
That's why one of the most powerful things I think I try to bring to therapy is when someone brings their vulnerabilities up, I ask them, how do you think I'm thinking about that, as you told me? Because there's times when they'll say, I think, I'm afraid you're going to judge me.
I was going to say, does that scare people when you ask them that question?
It gives them permission to admit it.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful.
Because they're feeling that way probably with everybody, not just me.
Yeah.
But that gives permission to be vulnerable with me and to remind them I have absolutely no reason to judge you. I'm here to support you and to understand you unconditionally and to make sense of what's happening rather than to judge it. That's really not what I'm here for. So it's, opens things up. So,
and for the record, as people in this field doing this work every day, Jerry, I'll speak for myself and you can share your opinion and perspective. I often will say that I understand how hard it is to be vulnerable, and I work on that every day for myself too. I try to honor and be authentic to the process for myself because I know how difficult it is to ask somebody else to do that too.
Yeah. Like you try to do too much by yourself, you're going to become anxious. It's just the way it is. If you feel like you're carrying too much weight because you're trying to prove yourself or not admit your vulnerabilities, you're going to become anxious. And that's not a sign of strength. That's a sign of, covering up your vulnerability. And that's not the same thing as strength. Sometimes it's great to, push away your vulnerability and push through and work really hard. That's actually helpful sometimes, but sometimes it's really just a mask. And it's driven by fear. It's not driven by strength at all. It's very relieving to let go of that burden that you carry.
This is another conversation for another time, but grit can only take us so far. Sometimes we have to actually understand what's happening underneath the surface to identify what we need to do next.
There's no better feeling than just realizing, other people also are vulnerable, and I am too. Wow, what a relief.
Yeah. So I'm here to say we too have to do our own work.
Yeah,
even as professionals in the field, to be vulnerable, to constantly evolve and learn and grow.
Absolutely. So we got one more thing to get through. So the first one was a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint in terms of social anxiety. The second was more about learning how to understand and accept yourself and appreciate yourself so you feel more comfortable wherever you are because you feel, you appreciate who you are. And then the third is, and we didn't really get into this, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but, there could be aspects of life that have conditioned you to feel anxious around people that is not just a random, I'm an anxious person. There could be experiences that you've had. Some could be traumatic. Some could be, just kind of
invalidating.
Yeah. So some examples, right? You can kind of grow up in a culture or an environment or a family structure, whatever, or a school system, whatever, where the expectations are dramatically high, incredibly high, and almost impossibly high, where everybody is supposed to somehow reach this unbelievable high expectation and do everything they can to reach it at the expense of their own whatever, at the expense of whatever they're sacrificing to get there, right? So that could, in of itself create a lot of social anxiety. Oh my God, can I really, fit into this mold and sacrifice everything to get there?
I will say too, Jared, that that aspect of social anxiety is very closely related to these perfectionistic tendencies that we talked on
For sure.
the perfectionism episodes about, for sure. So,
For sure.
Even though we didn't dive too deeply into it here, understanding how the environment for which we exist in, we live in, we grew up in, might set these expectations, or those expectations and the bars that we set for ourselves might also create and perpetuate social anxiety.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said earlier in the introduction about trust. Social anxiety a lot of times is about trust. And if you don't trust that people are going to unconditionally care about you and accept and respect and appreciate you, even if you're not perfect all the time, that's going to create a lack of trust around people, i.e. social anxiety.
Well, I would argue that we're not always going to have that ideal where people are going to honestly, genuinely have our best interests at heart.
No, but what I'm saying is that if it's just a chronic condition where you never feel that way, that's going to create this sense of like constant anxiety around people.
Right.
And that again, I'm talking about trust. Trust is something that forms over time. Trust can happen even in traumatic situations, right? Like someone abused you, someone bullied you, someone, like in a family structure where there's a lot of chaos and you felt like you couldn't trust the people around you. You can begin to inherently feel like a sense of shame around people. Like, I'm a bad person. People don't like me. I'm mistreated. I deserve to be mistreated. All these traumatic, stuck points people fall into that they bring with them into social situations can look like just, run-of-the-mill social anxiety when really it's rooted in something deeper than that people have to kind of go back and really work through. Oh, like, wow, why did that person treat me that way? Why was that not about me? Why did I not deserve, all the processing that really helps to work through that type of trauma. And even something as simple as you're in a relationship with someone who's impossible to please or someone who's manipulative, right? That makes you feel like you're never good enough, whatever it is.
Whether it's a caregiver or a parent or a friend or a romantic partner, right? That could show up in all those situations. Put
anyone in a position of power, a coach, right?
Yes.
An athletic coach. That's it's never enough. You always have to continuously reach someone, you're, belittling people in an abusive way, right? So all these things, we have to be mindful when we're understanding. That's why therapy is so important. When I teach people about how to do therapy, so you got to understand the person's full life and really get to know where are these patterns coming from. That doesn't mean that you don't focus on the present and help them to work through it and to be brave and to use exposure therapy, but also, people could get stuck. And if they haven't processed somewhere where they got stuck in their life, they may still kind of be in that same mindset that they were when things were really going poorly, when they were being mistreated.
I think that's a really important point, Jerry. And again, to go back to what we said at the beginning about the delineation between these are some social anxieties that come up for us in our everyday life, typical situations, which, again, anxiety is a signal that helps us to pay attention differently to how we're feeling and how we're experiencing a moment. But to really understand that if it is incredibly impactful to a point where maybe you are avoiding situations, and I don't mean just physically avoiding being in different spaces, but also, numbing yourself. There are a lot of people who might use substances to numb their experience or quote unquote feel more comfortable. I'll just have a drink or take a thing and it'll make me feel better and be more open to a situation where in the short term it might be true, but in the long term, are you really targeting that which is impairing your ability to feel comfortable in social situations?
Yeah, even so, absolutely. So many people at parties will drink or use substances excessively as if they think they want to have fun, when the reality is they're just doing it to mask their social anxiety. People sacrifice themselves for the sake of trying to be liked. I'm going to do everything for this other person so they like me, and they lose sleep or they neglect their own needs to take care of somebody else.
We call that fawning, right?
Well, no, I would say codependence in some ways is you do too much because you're trying to overcompensate for the fear of not being liked. And then you sacrifice yourself and you maybe just overdo trying to help other people rather than take care of yourself, right? That could, in some ways, look like social anxiety because it could be driven by a fear that people are not going to like you. And it's not driven by intention or values. It's driven simply by a fear. Oh, I have to do this so they like me, right? As opposed to like, I'm doing this because I'm a kind person and I care about them.
I'm not going to meet the standard that others expect of me.
Yeah, or just like, this is the only way that I'll be liked is to like, you know, do something excessive. And like, there's so many forms that social anxiety can come in. And if I were to just boil it down, is just think, is this driven by fear or intention? Fear or intention? Because fear comes from a million different places.
Yeah, and the thing that I keep saying to myself, at least, is, you know, is this anxiety or is this intuition, right? Is this something that genuinely is like giving me a signal of, okay, maybe I need to prepare for this moment differently, or maybe I need to use some strategies to calm my senses, right? To calm my stress level in this moment? Or is this something I need to pay attention to differently? You know, I don't want us to say just like ignore any of these anxious moments in different situations, because we do want to be safe. But, you know, just be mindful, check the facts. And like we always do, Jerry, like, you know, just at the very least, take a breath to be able to calm your nervous system down, to think clearly, get out of that emotion mind, as they say in DBT, out of your emotion mind and into more of a wise-minded state to be able to make a decision, to be on a more mindful path and journey.
And yeah, the last thing I'll say about that is, you know, do this in a way that works for you. If you feel like pressure to go out with somebody and hang out for like 3 hours or like hang out all night, don't do it. Just be like, I have 2 hours in me. Let's hang out for 2 hours. That's the most I can feel comfortable with. Then do that. If even it's for an hour, like, you know, this kind of goes back to when you feel like you can speak up for yourself. You can be less socially anxious because you feel like you have more agency around a situation, even with conflict. Like learn how to handle conflict, and therefore you feel less anxious about conflict happening.
Well, let's have a whole episode on conflict. But I love a Vygotsky reference, right? Sometimes when we think about taking on a situation that feels uncomfortable, we might not need to take a huge leap. Maybe we take one step at a time. We scaffold it. We break it down into smaller parts until we get to the bigger thing that maybe has been feeling overwhelming. You don't need to do it all at once. You can break it down into smaller parts, like you were describing with exposure therapy. But with anything, we could break everything down into smaller parts until we get to the bigger accomplishment that we're aiming for.
Totally.
So I just want to wrap things up in saying that, number one, it makes sense why people feel more social anxiety, especially right now. We're living in a very digital world that can feel isolating. But our encouragement here is to tune in to the things that are important to us, especially our values, right? Get clear on your identity. If you have the opportunity to do some of that work, there are a lot of great resources available or people to talk to be able to dive into that work. And also, take those little moments to interact with other people, right? A smile on the street, an act of kindness, sharing a compliment, right? Those are all precursors to feeling more comfortable in bigger, sometimes more overwhelming situations. But we need practice. We need the opportunity to engage and interact with each other so that we can find that connection that I think we all are craving, especially today.
Definitely. Great conversation again, Lex. This is Social Anxiety 2.0.
Probably more to come, I'd anticipate. Yeah, I could predict that probably is going to be the truth.
For sure.
Thanks, Chair. Well done.
You too. Thanks for tuning in to the ReidConnect-Ed podcast. Please remember that this is a podcast intended to educate and share ideas, but it is not a substitute for professional care that may be beneficial to you at different points of your life. If you are in need of support, please contact your primary care physician, local hospital, educational institution, or support staff at your place of employment to seek out referrals for what may be most helpful for you. Ideas shared here have been shaped by many years of training, incredible mentors, research, theory, evidence-based practices, and our work with individuals over the years, but it's not intended to represent opinions of those we work with or who we are affiliated with. The ReidConnect-Ed podcast is hosted by siblings Alexis Reid and Dr. Gerald Reid. Original music is written and recorded by Gerald Reid. Recording was done by Cybersound Studios. If you want to follow along on this journey with us, the ReidConnect-Ed podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks each season. So please subscribe for updates and notifications. Feel free to also follow us on Instagram at ReidConnect-Ed podcast. That's ReidConnect-Ed podcast, and Twitter at ReidConnect-Ed. We are grateful for you joining us and look forward to future episodes. In the meanwhile, be curious, be open, and be well.